So, many video game studios start with paper prototypes for many of these reasons, and if it's good enough for video game makers, isn't it good enough for an aspiring designer? And here is an article where I describe this in some detail. It's also in my book. You can find other articles, similar articles on Game Career Guide and so forth. Now, having said all that, if you insist on starting with software, there are ways to save time, which I'm going to now describe. Writing code is hard. It's like a foreign language, but it also requires a great deal of logic and problem solving. It's not intuitive. It's not something where you can do guesswork. You have to get it exactly right. The computer is really, really, really dumb and will do exactly what you tell it, even if that's not what you meant it to do. Not everyone has the right makeup to be a programmer. In fact, most people nowadays do not, because what we emphasize in the schools is that it's not necessary to be precise and that we should use intuition rather than logic, and that is the opposite of what makes for good programming. But video games are software, so doesn't that require programming? Yes, but not necessarily writing code. There are software tools that will, in effect, write the code for you. So you can use a drag and drop interface and move things around, and without too much programming, although you still have to use logic, without too much writing of code, you can end up with software. The most notable of these, in my experience, is GameMaker, and the latest version is GameMaker Studio. There's a free version. The professional version is $50. Now that's for Windows games. But in general, if you're going to develop video games, you're going to start with Windows because you have powerful Windows computers and because it's relatively easy to work with. Even if you want to make console games, you make them on Windows computers and then convert them to the console. Another program that's become popular lately is Construct2, and that makes HTML5 games, and those are web games meant to be played through a web browser. And of course, that limits what you can do as compared with GameMaker Studio. There are some very well-known professional games that were made with GameMaker Studio. Not big games, because it's still 2D, not 3D, but still very well-known and popular. There are also lots of programs that have a free trial version and then cost some money. And Media Fusion, for example, is one of them. If you look on Udemy's course lists and look up game, you'll find that many of the Udemy courses involved in games are designed to help you use one software tool or another to help you make games. I recommend GameMaker because you can get a free version, because it's easy to use. I've taught people to use it, and I have made them in a one-semester class, which was also an introduction to game development. I have had them reproduce classic games such as Pac-Man, Space Invaders, Galaga, and so on. 2D games, but still pretty darn good for one semester when you're doing other things as well. And part of the reason why it's good is there is a book you can get, which I list here, Game Maker's Apprentice, that helps you learn how to use GameMaker. Now, Game Maker's Apprentice originally was written for Game Maker 6 or 7 and included Game Maker 6 on CD. Well, Game Maker Studio is more or less Game Maker version 9, but I think still it would help you a great deal. And there's a sequel to this book as well if you want to go on. So GameMaker is a great choice, and you can get it by going to Yo-Yo Games and downloading it anytime. At Yo-Yo Games, you can see lots of games that have been made with GameMaker as well. But GameMaker is quite limited. It's only 2D, and there's, especially the free version, is resource limited. But even the professional version, there are things you can't do, lots of things. So some people go to Unity or Unity 3D. This is a free program, although if you make a game and then want to sell the game, you're going to have to pay them some for the Unity. It's becoming a standard for people who make mobile games. There are over 2 million registered developers. Another one that's available, which is on a higher level because it's part of the Unreal 3 engine, which is used to make many of the AAA games, is the Unreal UDK, Unreal Developers Kit. Both of them have free versions, but now you're talking about real coding, real programming here. This is not as simple as something like GameMaker, and so there's going to be a big learning curve. Even for people who are already familiar with programming, there's going to be a considerable learning curve because they have to learn how to use these engines. Now, learning to design games is about making games. You can read about it, you can listen to people talk about it. That's not enough. You've got to do it. Of course, there are about 500 colleges and universities in the United States that have some kind of game curriculum, although few of them teach game design, even when they call it game design. And that's because, by and large, they have no one available who has a clue what game design is. Sometimes they call their curriculum game design because it's more sexy than game development. But what they teach is game development. That is to say, they teach a lot of programming of games and art for games and sound for games and so forth. And of course, these places are expensive, although community colleges are much less expensive than the four-year schools. And the teachers often aren't game people. In fact, frequently what has happened at schools is the programmers have had big problems recruiting people into their programming curricula, and consequently they've started a game curriculum so they can teach programming. Even if you go through one of these 500 schools, you are going to have to make and complete games to become good at it. It's not sufficient to sit in a class and read books and listen to talks and watch videos. You have to make games. So, however you go about learning, make complete games. They don't have to be video games to start with, but they need to be complete games. You're still learning.